These are the richest families in tiny Rhode Island, and what they do with their wealth is absolutely crazy. We're talking a TV judge who bought a $9 million mansion in 9 days flat, a toy empire that hid a devastating secret for years, and a tech billionaire quietly buying up Newport's Gilded Age, one mansion at a time. Let's get into the full list. Number 8. The Sheindlin family. Let's kick things off with someone whose voice you have absolutely heard in a waiting room at some point in your life. Judy Sheindlin, better known as Judge Judy, spent over 2 decades turning pure, zero-nonsense courtroom energy into one of the most successful daytime TV franchises in broadcast history. She and her husband, Judge Jerry, converted all those Emmy wins and record-shattering ratings into a private fortune worth around $440 million. Not bad for a woman whose entire brand is telling people they're wrong on television. And the Rhode Island chapter of her story is just perfect, because it tells you everything about who she is. In July 2018, Judy and Jerry toured 4 different Newport properties on a single Saturday afternoon. 4 houses, 1 day. By Sunday, they had a favorite, a 10,000-square-foot shingle-style estate called the Birdhouse, perched on 3.5 acres at the top of one of Newport's highest ridges with unobstructed panoramic views of the Atlantic. They threw down a non-contingent cash offer before the weekend was even over. Under contract by Monday, fully closed and funded 9 days later. 9 days. Most people take longer than that deciding on a couch, but the house earns the price tag. The Birdhouse was originally built in 2012 for a Campbell Soup heiress, loaded with custom bird-carved millwork and bird statues woven through the gardens. Grand entrance hall, private library, a multi-floor elevator, covered porches with ocean views that feel like the literal top of the world. $9 million. Cash. On a Monday. There's something deeply satisfying about the fact that the woman who built a career on cutting through nonsense buys oceanfront real estate the exact same way. No contingencies, no delays, no drama. At least not on her end. But if 9 days sounds fast to you, the next guy made his decision in roughly the time it takes to drive past a house. Number 7. The Leno family. We're staying in TV royalty territory, but this one comes with a detail so absurd it could be a bit from his own monologue. Jay Leno hosted NBC's Tonight Show for decades and quietly stacked up around $450 million, which he has famously spent on 2 things: comedy and cars. We're talking over 150 vintage automobiles, and that car collection is the key to the best part of this whole story. Here's what went down. In 2017, Jay and his wife Mavis had 0 plans to buy an East Coast home. They weren't looking. They weren't in the market. They were just driving down Ocean Avenue in Newport when Jay spotted a French chateau-inspired mansion sitting on a gated 9-acre peninsula, right on the water, and apparently decided on the spot that it had to be his. The place is called Seafair. Roughly 16,000 square feet, up to 14 bedrooms, a tennis court, an ocean-facing infinity pool, a private beach, and a carriage house. The master suite even has a soaking tub positioned directly under a steel and crystal chandelier, the kind of detail that reminds you there are levels to wealth most of us will never see. Jay made an immediate as-is cash offer and closed in 30 days at $13.5 million, a steep discount from the original $19 million ask. The man drove past a 9-acre coastal fortress and owned it before the month was out. Now here's the part that's almost too good to be true. Jay Leno owns one of the most famous car collections on Earth, and Seafair came with a luxury 6-car garage and a wide driveway practically designed for showing off historic vehicles. Perfect match, right? Wrong. Jay flat out refuses to store his cars there because his preservation experts decided the salty ocean air poses an unacceptable rust risk to the original chassis. So the man spent $13.5 million on a coastal estate with a custom car garage, and that garage sits completely empty. The cars stay in California. Meanwhile, the property reportedly costs around $50 grand a month just to run. But hey, when you buy a place on a whim because it looked nice from the road, 50 grand a month is just a line item. Both of our TV stars grabbed their slice of Rhode Island on pure impulse. This next family did the polar opposite of impulse, methodically buying up an entire city, brick by brick, for 125 years straight. Speaking of a smart, deliberate buy that quietly pays you back, that's exactly what pulled someone on our team to the Pulse R8 smart ring. It reads your heart rate, your sleep, and your workouts right from your finger. A week on a charge, 100 days with the case, and it's fully waterproof. The surprise was the price. Under $40, a fraction of the big-name rings, because it comes direct instead of through the retailers that mark everything up. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Because our next family spent 125 years quietly buying up an entire city, brick by brick. Number 6. The Paulino family. No celebrity estates here. This is the story of a family that has been quietly, deliberately building the physical city of Providence for 4 straight generations. It started back in 1900 when an Italian immigrant named Joseph Paulino arrived in Rhode Island and founded what would become Paulino Properties. 125 years later, that firm manages over 40 properties and nearly 3 million square feet of commercial real estate in downtown Providence, with a family net worth estimated around $600 million. That is what a century of disciplined reinvestment actually looks like. The current face of the dynasty is Joseph R. Paulino Jr., and his resume alone deserves a documentary. Former mayor of Providence, former state economic development director, U.S. ambassador to Malta. He came home from that ambassadorship, sold a building for a $125,000 commission, and decided real estate was just more interesting than politics. Honestly, hard to argue. In 2014, he bought the 20-story Class A tower at 100 Westminster Street for $60 million in cash, making him the only Rhode Island resident to personally own a major high-rise in the state capital. His tenants include Bank of America and the U.S. Attorney's Office. When federal prosecutors are paying you rent, you've clearly done something right. Then in 2026, the Paulinos made their biggest move yet, scooping up the struggling Providence Place Mall out of receivership for $133 million. And here's the detail that tells you everything about how this family operates. There was actually a higher bid on the table. A Texas firm offered $19 million more. The Paulinos won anyway, because they didn't need a complicated new tax break to make the deal work, and the city simply preferred dealing with them. Sometimes knowing the room beats having the biggest number. The wildest part? Joe Paulino got hooked on real estate at 17 when he pocketed a $200 commission on his very first deal. $200 to $600 million. That's a return that makes venture capital look downright boring. But $600 million is just where the Paulinos sit. The next family plays the exact same real estate game at nearly double the scale, with a backstory about twice as complicated. Number 5. The Procaccianti family. Number 5. $800 million. And a story with more layers than most primetime dramas. James Procaccianti and his wife Elizabeth run one of the largest privately held real estate and hospitality companies in the entire United States, and they run it out of Cranston, Rhode Island. Not exactly where you'd expect to find an operation that's done deals in more than 350 cities across 42 states. At their peak, the Procaccianti companies have owned around 600 hotels and 65,000 guest rooms. That's enough rooms to house the entire population of a mid-sized American city, all under one family's control. Their Rhode Island footprint includes the waterfront Hilton Garden Inn in Providence and coastal properties in Narragansett and Jamestown. James also sits on the boards of Rhode Island Hospital and the state's largest homeless shelter, so the community presence is real. But here's where it gets complicated. Back in the 1990s, James and his uncle were indicted by federal authorities, accused of defrauding a credit union. The case eventually collapsed after prosecutors failed to turn over key evidence, and no conviction was ever secured. But in a state where everybody knows everybody, that kind of chapter doesn't fully disappear. Now here's the detail that shows you where this family really sits in the Rhode Island power structure. Their private wealth management firm is called Canton Hathaway, and that name is no accident. Canton is the original company founded by James's parents. Hathaway is a direct nod to Berkshire Hathaway, because the Chase family, whose history is tied directly to Berkshire's origins in Rhode Island textile mills, co-founded Canton Hathaway alongside the Procacciantis to manage their combined fortunes under one roof. 2 dynasties, different industries, one quiet vehicle. That's the kind of power move that never makes a headline but tells you exactly how serious money works in this state. Now, the Procacciantes built their empire in hotels you've probably slept in. The next family built theirs in something you almost certainly played with as a kid, all while privately carrying a secret heavy enough to break your heart. Number 4. The Hassenfeld family. This one starts exactly the way a great American story should, with two immigrant brothers, a pile of fabric scraps, and absolutely no idea what they were building. Henry and Hillel Hassenfeld arrived in Providence in the early 1920s, started a textile remnant business, pivoted into school supplies, and called themselves Hassenfeld Brothers. Pencil boxes and art kits. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. Then, in 1952, they started distributing a little plastic toy called Mr. Potato Head, which became the first toy ever advertised on television. One potato-shaped piece of plastic, one TV commercial, and the entire direction of the company flipped overnight. What followed was decades of Hasbro becoming one of the two biggest toy companies on the planet. Monopoly, Transformers, G.I. Joe, My Little Pony, Nerf, Play-Doh, Scrabble, the Star Wars toys. Think about that for a second. If you had a childhood anywhere on Earth, this one Rhode Island family had a hand in it. But here's where the story turns from great American success into something far more human. In 1989, Stephen Hassenfeld, the CEO of Hasbro and the architect of its modern dominance, died suddenly at just 47. The publicly stated cause was pneumonia and cardiac arrest. What was not disclosed at the time was that Stephen had been privately battling AIDS. At the absolute height of the epidemic, with the company's stock and reputation on the line, the family made the agonizing decision to keep his diagnosis completely private. They held a fierce bedside vigil, and they kept that information from the press, the public, and even Hasbro's own board, carrying the entire weight of it themselves until after he was gone. His brother Alan, who by his own admission saw himself more as a creative free spirit than a buttoned-up executive, was suddenly thrust into the CEO chair and went on to lead the company through massive acquisitions like Tonka and Parker Brothers. That's not just a corporate succession story. That's a person showing up for his family in the most impossible circumstances imaginable and somehow still building something remarkable. And their legendary Bristol compound, an Asian-inspired waterfront estate called Shangri-La, with a Japanese tea house, a Zen koi pond, and 600 feet of bay coastline, sold in late 2024 for $6.1 million, one of the highest home sales in the town's history. A billion-dollar empire built from a pencil box, and a private tragedy carried with quiet dignity. It's one of the most layered stories Rhode Island has ever produced. But if you want the wildest origin story on this entire list, it belongs to the next family, who made one stubborn decision that accidentally created the most famous investment empire on the planet. Number 3. The Chase family. This one is genuinely wild, because the Chase family is sitting on one of the most underappreciated origin stories in American financial history, while simultaneously being tangled in a family lawsuit dramatic enough to need its own multi-year court calendar. Let's start with the origin story, because it's incredible. Back in the 1960s, the Chase family held major equity in a group of New England textile businesses, the kind of slowly dying industrial operations everyone was racing to get out of. Most of the family voted to sell, take the money, move on. But the patriarch, Malcolm Chase, decided to hold. And that single contrarian decision, that one refusal to follow the crowd, turned out to be one of the most consequential investment choices in modern American history. Because the company that emerged from those Rhode Island textile mills became the corporate shell that a young investor named Warren Buffett took over and transformed into Berkshire Hathaway, the most celebrated holding company ever built. Let that sink in. The Chase family didn't set out to hand Warren Buffett his vehicle. They just decided not to leave when everyone else did. And that stubborn patience compounded into a family fortune estimated at $1.7 billion. Bonus detail, Malcolm Chase is also widely credited as a father of American lawn tennis, helping introduce the sport to the U.S. and establish the Tennis Hall of Fame right there in Newport. So one man, from this one tiny state, helped shape both American finance and American sport in a single lifetime. The current chapter, though, is a lot less peaceful. The family has been split by a bitter battle over their family trust. In 2022, Malcolm Chase IV filed a sweeping lawsuit alleging that his cousin, a prominent Providence developer, and a co-trustee improperly funneled tens of millions out of the trust into speculative real estate projects. The suit also raised explosive allegations about a will being amended while the late patriarch was incapacitated. Now, important context here, these were allegations made in litigation. The parties disputed them, and the broader case reportedly settled confidentially in 2024. But the very fact that a fortune born from Berkshire Hathaway's foundation ended up in a courtroom war. This messy tells you the Chase family genuinely contains multitudes. The next man on this list is worth more than all of them, and yet most Rhode Islanders couldn't pick him out of a lineup, which is exactly how he likes it. Number 2, the Nelson family. Here's a name that plenty of people inside Rhode Island, let alone outside it, have genuinely never heard. Which is precisely how Jonathan Nelson likes it. Nelson is the founder of Providence Equity Partners, one of the most powerful private equity firms on earth. He grew up in Providence, graduated from Brown, got his MBA from Harvard, and then did the unusual thing: he came back home to build a global investment empire. He founded the firm in 1989 right there in Providence, and it has stayed headquartered there ever since. In the world of multi-billion-dollar private equity, keeping your HQ in Little Rhode Island instead of New York is almost stubbornly unusual. And the portfolio is staggering. Over 170 companies across media, communications, and education, with assets under management somewhere between $29 and $37 billion. Here's one bet to give you the scale. In 2007, the firm put $300 million into ZeniMax Media, the video game studio behind Elder Scrolls and Fallout. Microsoft later bought ZeniMax for $7.5 billion. That's roughly a 6 times return on a single play. Nelson's personal fortune sits at an estimated $3.6 billion, officially making him the wealthiest full-time resident of the entire state. And yet the man lives in understated old money elegance. A historic estate on the east side of Providence. Board seats preserving the legendary Newport Folk and Jazz festivals. A trustee role at Rockefeller University. He even hosted a late-night jazz radio program back in his younger days. His philanthropy at Brown includes a $25 million gift to launch an entire entrepreneurship center. Because he's not just slapping his name on buildings, he's actively trying to build the next generation of founders right where he came from. The story isn't without its bruises. Nelson has publicly acknowledged major losses, including a huge write-down when one portfolio company went bankrupt, plus heavy hits on a for-profit college operator and a failed film studio. For a man whose whole reputation was built on precision, those were real public stumbles. But he weathered every one of them, the firm adapted, and $3.6 billion later, he's still the most powerful private equity operator Rhode Island has ever produced, running it all from the same city he grew up in. At this level, that might be the most interesting flex of all. And then there's number 1, where the number we're suddenly dealing with is $242 billion. That is not a typo. Number 1, the Ellison family. Just to calibrate you, the combined net worth of every other family on this entire list doesn't come close to touching what Larry Ellison is worth. Not even in the same area code. He isn't just the richest person in Rhode Island, he's one of the 3 or 4 richest human beings on the entire planet. Ellison co-founded Oracle in 1977 and spent decades turning it into one of the most dominant software and cloud companies in the world. And his wealth long ago stopped being about money and became about legacy and influence, the question of what a person even does with resources most governments don't have. And what Larry Ellison decided to do, at least in part, is reassemble Newport, Rhode Island's entire Gilded Age, property by property, mansion by mansion, with an ambition that is honestly historical in scale. It started in 2010 when he bought Beechwood, the legendary mansion that once served as Mrs. Caroline Astor's social headquarters back in the 1800s, one of the most historically significant properties in all of New England. He paid $10.5 million for it, then poured over $100 million more into a meticulous, multi-year restoration, returning every inch of the place to its exact original 1881 designs. $100 million to restore a single private home to its original form, simply because Ellison decided it was worth doing right. And Beechwood was just the start. In 2019, he grabbed the estate next door for $11 million. Then came another neighboring property, where in 2023, his holding company got approval to tear down the existing structure and build a custom 15,000 square foot oceanfront mega residence. When you add it all up, Ellison has quietly reassembled the original 9-acre coastal estate that the Astor family created back in 1881, the exact same footprint, more than a century later. His total Newport real estate investment now sits well past $160 million, making him the single most dominant private property owner in the state's most historic luxury market. And once it's all finished, he's turning it into a private art museum. Ellison's personal collection reportedly includes multiple Van Gogh masterpieces, and the plan is to convert the entire first floor of Beechwood into his own private gallery of priceless 18th and 19th century European art, inside a Gilded Age mansion on Bellevue Avenue, for him and whoever he chooses to invite in. And the broader Ellison lifestyle is exactly what you'd imagine: a fleet of mega yachts, custom fighter jets, a legendary supercar collection. He famously loved one particular sports car so much that he reportedly bought dozens of them to hand out as gifts. Oh, and he also owns Lanai, an entire Hawaiian island. The man does not think in small gestures. And the ambition didn't skip a generation either. His son David founded the studio behind some of Hollywood's biggest blockbusters, and his daughter Megan runs one of the most respected independent film studios in the business. Dad rebuilds a Gilded Age coastline. The kids remake Hollywood. There's something genuinely poetic about ending the list right here. Larry Ellison looked at the entire history of Newport's wealth, the Vanderbilts, the Astors, the dynasties that built Bellevue Avenue into the most opulent street in 19th century America, and decided to bring it all back to life. Not as a museum, not as a historical project, but as his personal estate. Rhode Island has always understood the quiet relationship between land and enormous power. It just never felt the need to announce it. And that's the list. 8 families, 1 tiny state, and a combined story of wealth that is genuinely unlike anywhere else in America. A TV judge who bought a mansion in 9 days. A toy empire built from a pencil box that carried a private tragedy nobody talked about for years. A family whose stubborn refusal to sell accidentally handed Warren Buffett his entire empire. And a tech titan spending over $160 million to bring Newport's Gilded Age roaring back to life, one mansion at a time. So I'm genuinely curious. Which family surprised you the most? The Chase family's courtroom drama, the Hassenfeld family's secret, or Larry Ellison quietly buying up an entire block of Newport history? Drop it in the comments, smash that like button, and subscribe, because we'll see you on the next one.